Hello and welcome to the Liquid Strategy Guide for Aberrus Shadowed Crucible. I am Kalamazi and today I'm going to break down the mechanics and strategy for Mythic Scale Commander Sarkareth. Phase 1. To start off, let's go over the Mythic changes and other important mechanics. In Mythic, hitting 10 Oblivion stacks and going down into the Void Realm now drops a dimensional puncture at your feet. These ground effects are permanent and contact with them causes you to fall to the floor and die at all times. We now accrue 2 stacks of Pressing Howl in Phase 1, and each stack must be removed uniquely by 1 hit of Searing Breath and 1 hit of Mass Disintegrate. We have a new Mythic add in Phase 2 called Empty Recollection, which must be focused down before its raid-wide damage cast becomes uninterruptible. This fight strategy guide deviates massively from Heroic with high execution requirements relating to the optimal baiting of many mechanics, regular and important assignments, and exact movement. Telegon has prepared many graphics that will be shown throughout this video to assist with understanding and visualization. We will also be presenting a non-classical strategy due to the nature of the recent nerfs to the encounter that involve skipping the second time the raid would go down to avoid the Cosmic Ascension, as well as an innovative strategy to reduce the amount of stacks the raid gains from black holes in Phase 3. We believe this to be the easiest strategy to execute at this point in time while being fairly flexible in terms of specialization requirements. Before we dig into Phase 1, I want to present a graphic which shows which abilities target which class of players in this encounter. This knowledge is important for understanding the movement requirements imposed by our strategy. Now for Phase 1, due to the increased stacks and evolved nature of Pressing Howl, we need to choose when people clear their stacks. We recommend you clear tanks and range healers with the first Searing Breath and the rest of the raid on the second Searing Breath. This clear does a massive amount of damage, and you should stack healer and raid CDs to live, and any massive spells you have should be allocated to remove the magic debuff applied by the breath. You should also look to use health potions during the raid's clear, as it will come back up in the third phase. The random Mass Disintegrate targets will clear players remaining in Pressing Howl stacks, and those not targeted should clear on the final Mass Disintegrate cast before Phase 2. At the beginning of the phase, all range should be stacked on a gateway for the first bombs, dropping all 3 on top of each other, taking 1 tick and gatewaying away. These bombs drop a dimensional puncture in their center, so this is a very nice way to begin the phase. For the following bombs, you should follow this graphic with range stacking and running together clockwise at the edge of the room. It is important that throughout the phase, that melee bait the Searing Breath away from range players. It's impossible for them to avoid while placing Scorching Bombs. The exception to this is obviously cast 2, where the raid wants to clear their Pressing Howl stacks. This breath should be baited towards range. The Liquid Weak Aura pack has many very important weak auras for this fight, and I highly recommend you import them. Among them are some reminders for Phase 1 and Phase 1 intermission I will mention now. A reminder for melee to bait the breath I just mentioned, a reminder for anyone with remaining Pressing Howl stacks to clear during either the last Searing Breath or Mass Disintegrate, depending on which they have left to clear. And finally, a counter and timer where you are in the downstairs phase to show how long you have left to finish the minigame, and a tracker for the debuff you require, touching one of the 3 swirlies you need before you come back up. To speak briefly about why the final weak aura is so important. The duration of the debuff you need to come up is short enough that it can easily fall off if you take 2 stacks quickly and wait to clear the third. So before we go down and enter the intermission and subsequently Phase 2, we all stack up to heal through the second Glittering Surge, then gateway to a marker to drop dimensional punctures as we go down. Shortly after we go down, we need to drop a second dimensional puncture. It is important that the entire raid stacks on this second marker to reduce incidental deaths from badly placed punctures. While Phase 1 relies heavily on staying alive, Stage 2 relies heavily on executing baits and positioning correctly while coordinating interrupts and stops on many adds. This graphic shows how we will move throughout the arena and bait several mechanics. Recalling our earlier graphic which showed us which abilities target which class of players, we can see that Abyssal Breath is targeted on range players only. As a result, we want to have our range stacked near the edge of the arena, while our tanks and melee stacked together closer to the center of the platform. This will cause Blossom baits to be on melee and easily avoided. The boss will also fly towards range and is also easily avoided, while spawning adds have their heal buffs instantly removed when they spawn in the Blossoms. As range are already stacked for the breath, they can easily move together baiting Void Bombs. The purpose of this movement is to avoid the 1 Oblivion stack that is applied in a radius around spawning Void Bombs, so make sure to keep moving past the bomb to avoid the stack. We recommend setting up a kick rotation by the way of MRT note and a weak aura that has players assigned to kick each ad cast. You will want to have bigwigs mark them to enable this. The large ad, Empty Reflection, is the priority target for this phase, as all ads are on a timer which render their cast uninterruptible. The small ads will quickly die to incidental cleave anyways. For infinite duress in this phase, you will have the targeted player move to the edge of the room, and players should position themselves so they do not get knocked into blossoms or punctures. The first duress should be dispelled as soon as the player is in position. The second duress is a bit strange and occurs before the second Void Bomb cast in Phase 2, where the range will stack for the knockback and then gateway backwards to bait Void Bombs and Abyssal Breath. As the boss leaves to begin Phase 3 and we dispel the final duress, we want to wait for the third big ad to die and the boss to fly away. We will then want to stack in front of a Venn diagram blossom and walk in the center as a raid. We use a reminder at 1 minute 50 seconds from the time the boss was interrupted to coordinate this. It is vitally important that you keep moving as you go down to avoid desynced punctures placed by players that go in with higher stacks than you. During this transition into Phase 3, several things will need to happen. As the entire raid is going down, one player will need to remain upstairs. This player will be one of the tanks, and they should go into this with 0 Oblivion stacks and receive a blessing of protection from a paladin. This bot prevents destabilized stacks from being applied, otherwise the tank would receive 19 stacks from the rest of the raid going down. This tank needs to bait the Astral Formation spawn at the mirror, which is where the boss flies to in both intermissions. The boss will cast Infinite Duress on the tank during this time, and ideally they will have the ability to remove the debuff. Telegon has made a graphic what abilities tanks can access to accomplish this. If your combination of tank specs cannot accomplish this, you can have a healer come up after the Astral Formation spawns, but before the rest of the raid and dispel you. However, this is extremely tight and should be avoided if possible. Going down like this allows your raid to entirely avoid the Cosmic Ascension cast while collecting haste and clearing any stacks of Oblivion they have acquired in Phase 2. It also forces only one instance of Astral Formation to spawn, reducing damage taken from Scouring Eternity. While the Astral Formation baited on only one player, we know exactly where it is in our line will be consistent throughout the phase. Phase 3 is the most complicated phase for execution, so we will attempt to communicate the intricacies primarily through graphics. To come out of downstairs into Phase 3, you will have a wiki aura on your screen saying New Astral Formations. After this timer expires, you may come up safely as long as your tank quickly removes Infinite Duress. Let's talk a bit about Void Bombs and Black Holes in Phase 3. You will want to assign players with immunities to the first 2 sets of Void Bombs, and have them come out from downstairs a bit later than they normally would. Essentially, these players just have to stay down until the closest mechanic to Black Hole that applies Oblivion stacks has passed. Then, they'll be guaranteed to be targeted and able to completely trivialize the mechanic. The Black Holes in this phase are very interesting, and our strategy revolves around avoiding taking the direct damage and stacks of Oblivion that soaking them gives. For the first 2 Black Holes, you can choose to commit 2 large externals, such as Guardian Spirit and Blessing of Sacrifice, the targeted player's own personals, and a separate immune player, such as a Rogue Cloaking, to avoid the Black Hole as a raid. You can also remove the sack and add a second immuning player to split the damage if that works out better for your composition. Of course, you can always have the option of soaking the Black Hole as a raid or sacking the targeted player. For Black Holes 3 and 4, there's a neat technology that may be applied, which is the fact that Black Holes prioritize players with exactly 0 stacks of Oblivion. To bait these Black Holes on players with avoidable immunities, what we will want to do is assign players with immunities to the first 2 set of Void Bombs in Phase 3, and have them come out from downstairs a bit later than they normally would. Essentially, these players just have to stay down until the closest mechanic to Black Hole resolves. Returning to the flow of the fight, after you soak the first Black Hole, you will then have some downtime during the Scouring Eternity cast. Remember, if you have Hurling Barrage at these safe lines, continue entirely past their graphics and can be used to avoid hitting the raid during this mechanic. It is important that throughout the phase, tanks are facing the Void Slash away from the raid and going down appropriately so that the explosion triggered by expiration does not hit the raid. At this point, 2 players will be targeted with Infinite Duress, and the boss will begin casting Cosmic Ascension. We will need a gateway to the edge of the room for the players targeted to escape the knockup and Cosmic Ascension after we mass dispel them. The rest of the raid can choose to either gateway during the knockback or simply allow the knockback to carry them to the edge of the room. A weak aura and sound for the mass dispel cast comes in massively clutch here, and we heavily recommend it. At this point, the raid will be stacked at the edge of the room, and a second Black Hole target will be chosen. If you want to solo soak it, you can have the targeted and immune player move slightly to the right of the group facing inwards as the mechanic resolves. Then Astral Formations will spawn and melee should return to the boss. While being careful of the Void Slash, the boss will cast upon returning to the play space after Cosmic Ascension. Range should move left as the Astral Formation spawn and bait the 2 Void Bombs before returning to the middle of the room. Black Hole 3 is next, and if we have orchestrated Void Bombs 1 correctly, a player with an immunity will be targeted. That player should take the Black Hole to the recently formed Astral Formations and destroy them with this Black Hole, vastly reducing the damage you will take from the next Scouring Eternity. We will receive Black Hole 4 next, which we will take to the left of the raid and immune, and a new Duress target will be chosen. We should dispel and get knocked safely to the right, and range will bait another pair of Void Bombs. This is where we have a choice of strategy. We can either choose to go down as a raid for this Cosmic Ascension like we did before, or stay up and deal with a few mechanics. I believe that the burden of execution is higher on the former, but I will discuss both. If you are going down, every player will need to require at least a 5 stack before the Cosmic Ascension is cast. You will need to then designate a marked player who will choose a moat for the entire raid to use to go down simultaneously. If you are not hit by this moat, you will die as you will be upstairs with the resolution of Cosmic Ascension. As before, once you go down, you should spread to avoid a possible death to Dimensional Puncture. At this point, you should wait for Astral Formations to spawn and the Dispel to resolve before coming back up. You can have your Holy Paladin come up early here to dispel and help a tank if necessary. The 5th black hole will go out as the raid comes up, and you will have more than enough time to have the raid top to soak it, although you can choose to sack it if need be. At this point, no more mechanics happen except Scouring Eternity, Infinite Duress, and Enrage. If you have access to Blessing of Spell Warden, you can choose to place it on any black hole cast, but I think the first or second, if you're going down twice, is likely best to avoid the stack and save the externals and immunities you would use to solo soak it. The 3rd and 4th holes you can force on players with immunities without spell warding, so it makes little sense to allocate there, and for the 5th hole, you have just come up and have 0 Oblivion stacks. There are no Astral Formations to clear, and the whole raid should be near 100% by the time it hits. Now for the Stay Up strat. Instead of going down, we get the Cosmic Ascension, and we want to run to the side and bait a set of Astral Formations. We will then return to the boss for a double Infinite Duress and get knocked back safely, avoiding punctures. We can place a new gateway for players with Duress to avoid the knockback. At this point, we get Black Hole 5 and can choose to Spell Ward it if you're running a Prop Paladin, sacrifice it and destroy the new Astral Formations, or soak it as a raid. When deciding between the two strats, you'll want to consider what your players will likely struggle with more: the execution of going down again, whether you have a second bop or a tank that is able to immune the destabilize, and the amount of damage you have. A recent kill of the boss with a no-go down strategy and 2 DPS players dying in phase 3 has the boss die at 655 just after the 3rd Cosmic Ascension cast while 4 healing. It is my opinion that unless you think your DPS is very low, you should heavily consider the stay up strat to avoid the difficulty of coordinating the second go down.
With that, we very much hope you found this and the rest of this Mythic Guide series useful. Please feel free to leave feedback or commentary below this video, and make sure to keep your eye on this channel, as we are always coming out with fresh, new, and exciting content. I'd like to thank you personally for taking the time to tune in, and I hope we'll see you back for next tier. Until then, I wish you the best of luck in the World of Warcraft, and I'll see you around.